Yeah, this will do. This is comfortable. Oh shit, my book. God damn it, I gotta get my drink too. Left it behind. Welcome everyone to Steven's Corner. Today I am reading a remix of The Cat in the Hat called Cat in the Hat on Aging. I cannot see. I cannot pee. I cannot chew. I cannot screw. Oh my God. What can I do? My memory shrinks. My hearing stinks. No sense of smell. I look like hell. My mood is bad. Can you tell? My body's drooping. Have trouble pooping. The golden years have come at last. The golden years can kiss my ass. Thank you.
Welcome everybody to Flatlands, the podcast.
Did you forget again?
No, I did not forget. I just like seeing you as you, just the hesitation as I wait to say.
You know, next time
The
you do that, I'm
podcast.
just going to continue where you left off.
Oh, okay. Welcome everybody to Flatlands, the
Podcast.
There you go. I was waiting. Welcome everybody to Flatlands, the podcast.
Cast.
Damn it. Welcome everybody to. You didn't get it that side, bitch.
Fucklands. We'll just change it to Fucklands for that one.
Yeah. Call it Fucklands. All right. Well, I am here with Jory. Hello. Hi, Jory.
How's everybody doing?
Oh, he decided he wanted to be a
taking
country
charge.
guy. Did you hear
Taking
that?
charge, yeah.
He's like,
I'm
how's
from
everybody
Texas.
doing?
What do you expect?
Well, we're all from Texas, Jory.
I know. I claimed you were from Kansas in one
No,
episode.
just because
This is true.
just because you live in Texas does not mean you're Texan.
True. My mother's from
But
Oklahoma.
everyone in this room, though, is okay. That brings up a fucking question. All right. So your mom's from Oklahoma, right?
Mhm.
To any Oklahomans out there, no offense, but full offense. Anyway, and my dad is from Iowa.
My grandfather's from New Mexico.
Yeah, we don't care about that. But so does that make me like a Texas mutt? Because I was born here, obviously,
Yeah.
but see, they weren't. My dad is not from Texas. He's not a Texan. He's a transplant.
You know what that makes you?
What?
John.
I was told I was hit with the stupid stick by somebody at church.
I was going to say you were hit with multiple.
Well, every
okay.
branch on the way down.
This
and then the spikes at the bottom. You know?
this is why. Mom's from Oklahoma.
Uh-huh.
Grandfather's from New Mexico.
Right.
And a lot of my dad's side of the family is from Missouri.
Mm,
I was told by somebody at church that I was hit by the stupid stick.
I believe it.
I believe him too.
Mhm.
My mother mostly because of it.
So, Jory, are all of your family from Texas?
Texas all the way back until you get to my great grandmother or something like that. My grandma was Comanche and my grandfather was German.
Mm.
So been Texas ever since we moved here. Pretty
So
much.
You've been in enough generations now to
Mhm.
be Texan.
Exactly. Takes the generations.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key.
But I mean, I was born here though, and I identify as a Texan. So does that make me like a 100% pure blood Texan since my dad is from Yankeeville, Iowa?
Don't
Like,
worry, I
we
side
just
with you on
isolated
that.
like
I-
half of our audience just now.
half.
We isolated 49 states of our
I
audience.
was gonna say. Hey, we've also got 3 countries going now.
This is true.
You're first generation Texan.
I-
That means in normal conversations
Well,
we can
would I
consider
really
you Texan,
be
but we
first-
all know.
Would I be first generation? Because my mom's from here. My grandparents on my mom's side's from here. Their parents on my mom's side's from here. Their parents of the parents are on my mom's side from. That's confusing, from here. And I mean, they're from here. So would I
I
really
feel like
be
I need a
first
notebook
generation?
and a pen to keep up with this.
Right.
I need to start drawing out your family tree. Okay, dad's from Iowa, mom, grandpa.
The whole podcast be us drawing in a freaking
Right.
book. Like,
just
you
see
should
the
be
draw-
here. You should see
Hey,
this.
there's a dry erase marker. There's a window.
Well, we also got a whiteboard right there that we.
It's
could
being
utilize.
taken at the moment.
There's that little clear section.
With what you just exclaimed, we need that window and that window.
Very well.
And maybe those.
And then that's where we have the camera on the other side, seeing the letters in reverse as we're contemplating the whole entire thing of my family lineage and if I really am a first generation Texan.
So
Well,
basically, you want to turn this podcast into an episode of CSI.
Not
'Cause
necessarily.
they do that a lot.
it's more like ancestry.
You know what I heard? I did not hear you say ancestry.
I know.
I heard
said
you
it.
say ancestry.
I said
Yeah, you heard it
I
right. You
said
hit it. You heard it right.
Oh, shit. No, I am not doing ancestry.com. Meet your sister today.
There's probably an app for that.
Right?
Nowadays, yeah.
You know, there's farmersonly.com. There's Christians dating
Christian
on-
Mingle.
Yeah, Christian
Yeah.
Mingle.
There's
Like-
probably ancestry somewhere.
Ancestry.
Go to ancestry.com.
Business opportunity.
Right? Me and my sister never realized how close we were until we both got on ancestry.com.
That's an SNL skit any given day of the week.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, shit, dude. Yeah, so SNL, if you want to do that, that's copyright trademark Flatlands the podcast. We'll be glad to talk to you.
Just imagine the court battle with that one.
Yeah. So, who's the idea? I was the one who thought about fucking his sister. Oh, shit. And Joy was the one who thought about fucking his brother. So, here we are.
So you're going to fuck his sister while he fucks his brother. That's how you just worded that.
Well, we are from the South, so
True.
So, we all could be related. When I fuck
hey,
a
knowing
girl,
knowing
I
your
could
dad,
be fucking your 38th cousin.
I don't care. I don't know who it is. But knowing your dad, I hope we are not.
well nowadays you never know with the 7 levels of separation.
You mean the 6 degrees of
6
separation?
degrees. Whatever.
It's not.
He's the NASA guy.
Oh, I was
Not
about
that
to say-
so many people you know
I'm the
everybody.
NASA and technology guy.
Yeah,
Keep
but
the
see-
incest away.
But here's the thing: you said 7 levels, and I first thought you were going to say 7-Eleven, and I was like,
I was thinking
What?
Dante's Inferno.
"There you go, that works too."
Right. I just watched a documentary about that, so that's probably why 7's on my mind.
Mm.
We know each other too well.
Oh shit!
All right, so should we get this thing going?
Wow, he just took your job.
I know. Wow.
He
last
just took your
I
job.
checked, is that we're the hosts and he's the guest.
He just took your job.
So now I'm the guest.
Apparently so. So what do you want to talk about, Jonathan?
Well, see, today when I was,
oh, hold on. Welcome everybody. Jonathan now is our guest here.
it's great to be back.
That would be awesome. Put you on as a guest.
No,
It's
fuck off.
You gotta admit that'd be funny.
There's the door. Get the fuck out. Thank you, everybody, for listening to Flatlands the podcast, the shortest episode we've ever had. Oh shit! But yes, all right. So yes, we can get into it, Mr. Pushy Bitch. But all right. So we talked about in the first end of an era episode.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about that we hadn't even gotten into the space shit, because what we were talking about, I don't know if you listened to that episode, but we were talking about like how the internet has changed things, brick and mortar stores because of the internet, different things that have changed even in our own lifetimes because of technology. And so we were starting to touch into space. Now, you are more knowledgeable about the space shit than I am.
Yeah, I'm a big space nerd.
Yes, you are. Like if Elon Musk were to come out and put his dick in front of your face, you would just
Oh,
like
he's my baby daddy.
Yeah, you would suck that shit,
Oh
dude.
yeah, I'll suck him dry.
Yeah, I know, dude. You'd be like,
Then again, I don't know if he'd want anything to do with me. He marries supermodels, so
and he does. He is Elon Musk.
I mean, when you're a multi-billionaire.
Yeah, but think about it though. Like, dude, see this drop of semen? That's Elon's. Like, I could clone him right now.
Oh, that'd be so wicked.
Right?
Some
You're
wicked shit. A little test tube just
Yeah. Which reminds me of a port I saw.
And told you we'd get back to that.
No, seriously though, she like sucks a dude's dick, right? And she like fucks him and sucks him. And then he's like, oh my God, that was so amazing. And then she like grabs a test tube and spits it and goes, thanks, that's the evidence we need.
Honestly, that nowadays that wouldn't surprise me if they ended up doing something like
Yeah,
that.
but see, the thing
That
is,
sounds like
though,
a modern episode of Criminal Minds.
But see, right? But the thing is her DNA would be mixed with his.
Yeah, but they know her DNA, so they'd be able to
I know,
spot
but
it.
then they'd be like,
Mhm.
first of all, you had sex with an inmate, not cool. And second of all, you again had sex with an inmate, not cool. And then it would,
I like how you ran out of points when you started that.
I had only 2 fingers.
Fair enough.
If they're gonna let an undercover smoke meth to prove he's not undercover,
But in this porn, she wasn't undercover.
What do you-
She was an obvious cop.
okay,
You did
And
not
the
clarify
defense-
that when you
the
started.
defense attorney could be like, she took advantage of my client and fucking drop all that shit. But anyway, back to getting on track.
Yeah, and since you're not the guest like he wants you to be.
I know. But all right, so you know about that stuff. So could you, with how much you know about it, could you walk us through how technology has changed? Obviously, with NASA and the Apollo missions and the first space missions and stuff like that, the technology has obviously taken massive leaps and bounds because the amount of data in those computers, we now have more than that in our pockets with our
Yes.
phones. So from obviously the first going around the moon, iterations to landing on the moon, and then coming back, from that point, the International Space Station to now what we have with SpaceX and shit, how has that technology changed? How is it changing? And what are we expecting on the horizon?
All right, so let's start a little bit. I'm gonna first ask y'all a question. Who won the space race?
I would say America did because we were the ones to get onto the moon.
Okay.
Although Sputnik was the first thing. Like,
All right, so I'm gonna take that as since we were the first ones to land on the moon, the only country
So
in
far,
existence
yep.
to land boots on the moon. We won the space race, right?
yeah.
So I'm gonna try to convince y'all at least partially to the contrary.
Okay.
So hit on a little bit of the technology. The computers in the Saturn V's, of course, before your Saturn V's, we had the Gemini programs and so on and so forth. Throughout the whole process of our manned space flight, we were behind Russia. And Russia put the first thing in the moon. Russia put the first animals in the moon. Russia put not on the moon. The first people in orbit, the first things in orbit, the first animals in orbit. They did everything first.
Right.
The only thing we did beat them at was going to the moon because they did not have that goal until 3 or 4 years after we had that goal. So they had 3 or 4 years less time. And in your astrophysics industries, 3 or 4 years is a massive, massive amount of time.
Well, I mean, even in today's modern technology,
Yes.
a year, if you haven't updated something, you're falling behind the curve.
And to put it into perspective, where the technology was standing back there, digital technology had just come out. Everything was running off of analog.
Right.
And your digital stuff, when it comes to the size, we don't think about the size of our computers much anymore. Back then, computers took up rooms, if
Right.
not warehouses.
Well, because even on the rockets that were used, or even the for the Apollo missions, their computers were hand wound.
Yes.
Each
Yes.
individual copper ring was a bit, and they had so many bits per thing, that basically equal 14 kilobytes for a massive fucking thing.
Yes.
And then all of that was piston driven shit, to tell it. The computer still controlled digital, But to do everything to keep it cool and all this other shit was all analog.
And the reason they decided to wind it, to do a wound, and they actually had, it's kind of funny, they had old ladies who worked in a crocheting factory that did all that stuff. They're the ones that actually built these computers for the Apollo missions and the Saturn V. The reason they did that is because when you're in outer space, we don't have the magnetic field and the atmosphere we have on the planet.
Right.
So your radiation that we're protected from here and all our computers and stuff, they're not as well protected out there.
Right.
And that can seriously damage the information that comes in and out of whatever computer system you're running.
Right.
They have radiation hardened computers nowadays. They didn't have that back.
Well, that's when they had all that, not foil. I can't remember what NASA actually calls it, but it's like, it starts with a K, I think, like
Something like that.
Krypton, something like that.
Yeah, it's
you know?
basically like their gold insulating
Yeah,
foil
yeah.
or whatever it is. So to kind of bypass that problem that they were going to have with the radiation, they decided that they were going to wind it up. Wind it into a basically like one of those things that you can crochet on or loop on that you can buy from Hobby Lobby or Michaels or whatever.
Right.
That's essentially what it was. And believe it or not, that them getting the computers wound like that with pre-programmed programs on it, as once you put the program on that, it's there, and it's going to take months, if not years, to fix it, even if you miss one little one or one little zero. So they had to make sure they got it right on every single one the first time, and that actually almost pushed Apollo over its 10 years since Kennedy's 10-year space speech. That almost pushed it over. That was one of the last things to get finished because it was so labor intensive. Believe it or not, it was easier to build the whole freaking rocket than the one computer.
Right, because I watched Smarter Every Day on YouTube.
That's a good one.
They went to that in Arkansas, that's like Space Center, and they talked to one of the guys from IBM that basically built those things that knew it. And they're like talking about in order to find out the ones and zeros of where everything was, that had to be manually printed out. And you have dudes that would manually go through line by line by line and then do the math, figure it out, and be like, yeah, that one's right.
Exactly. And so that's how the computer and the technology on the Apollo programs, everything else was manual everything. The launch abort system was done with, I forget if it's 4 or 8 lines, electrical lines that ran all the way down the rocket. And if 2 were severed at the same time, the launch abort system would be initiated. Just everything was physical there. And there are various videos you can watch out there, like the F1 engines, the big famous engine, and so on and so forth. They cannot be remade anymore for various different reasons, but there was no F1 engine built the same. They were all built by hand, and if something needed a little tweaking here for the engine to work properly, they would go in, take that piece out, tweak it by hand, and put it back. So there was no F1 engine the same.
Right.
Nowadays,
now by F1, you're referring to something different than obviously like the Formula.
Yes,
racing
something
type
different than
engines.
it's the engines that were on the Saturn V.
Okay.
You get your 5. That's where the Saturn V gets it named. You got 5 massive F1 engines, the biggest engines and the most powerful single chamber engines in the world at that time and since on one vehicle.
Okay. So then how do they go from obviously having to do everything by hand to how did that so go to progress to what was recently retired not too much long ago, the shuttles. Right. So how do they go from that to then technology of the shuttles, which lasted for longer than they probably should have, but from that to that, at least stop right there for then, and then we can continue on from there. So how do they go from like Apollo shit to where they were basically having it where they still had to pilot it coming back in, but it was pretty much computer controlled the rest of the way?
Yes. Okay. So coming out of your Apollo age, we already landed on the moon. The craze is starting to die down. Actually, in the middle of the Apollo age, I've seen clippets of it. You might be able to find it on the internet. But the space shuttle program was finally pushed through right in about approximately the middle of the Apollo program. And there's actually videos of astronauts on the moon talking about how the space shuttle just got passed. So it's pretty much been in the design phase, and it was technology that they could have done with the Saturn V. It was just decided to be put after the Saturn V. And though I love the space shuttle holds a very close. It's very close and near and dear to my heart. It's done things that rockets and other various things have never been able to do and may never be able to with various different things. But when it comes to its original track on what it was supposed to do, it completely failed. One of its biggest things that it was supposed to do was be reusable.
Well, because they did reuse a couple of them. I mean, like,
that's where we come to definition of reusable versus refurbishable. When you think reusable, you think of something like a cup in your house, or maybe even your car, or an airplane, or everything like that, right? Where you might have to do a few little things to it, like wash your cup, or change the oil, or fill it up with gas periodically, so on and so forth. That was not the case with a space shuttle. There was thousands, I think over 10,000, maybe even well over 10,000 tiles on the bottom. And each one was unique in its own way. And each one had to be visually and physically checked every single time the space shuttle came in. That was just on its heat shield. That was not talking about any of the, as we talked earlier with the radiation and computers, that was nothing having to do with maintenance on the computers. They would have to completely take their the rocket engines out of the space shuttle and basically completely rebuild it and stick a microscope in it and go down every track that was in it. That's not reusable, at least in my definition of reusable. That could be considered refurbishable, like refurbishing a car, so on and so forth. That would not be reusable. And it utterly bombed. It was supposed to be a new era in space flight.
What you're meaning is supposed to be when it comes in and it lands, you can basically put it on a rocket and send it up.
Basically is what it was supposed to do. Right, okay. It was supposed to be able to launch twice a month. Turned out we were only able to launch about 3 or 4 a year. And that was on a good year.
Right, okay.
And they were, the track record, yes, out of the over 100 some odd launches that they did, only 2 of them failed. But still, the track record is not there for the launches. But you take, let's say, Russia's Roscosmos. They have one of the original rockets that they ever flew, designed and flew, is still flying today in various different forms. It's called the Soyuz. The Soyuz, its base model, there's been 5 or 6 iterations of it, but its base model has flown over 1,000 times. I want to say over 1,200 times, but guaranteed over 1,000 times, and has only had 1, maybe 2 failures. And they are constantly sending people to the International Space Station. Supplies, people. They're, as of right now, they are the only place on the planet that can send humans to the International Space Station, since the space shuttle retired in 2012, I believe.
So now we're still getting into the technology of it. So how did that technology change, though? Like, I understand the reusable part of it, because that was also part of one of the reasons why, the Columbia disaster happened. Because I've read the NASA report, that foam obviously fell off and hit it, but it was being used and it wasn't 100% properly checked after, before its next launch. And that basically kind of what caused it. But in terms of just the technology itself that was within the crafts, and even the technology that NASA had at the time that they launched, how did that evolve, or how did that change in terms of?
Well, see, the technology in the space shuttle and reusability actually has a lot to do with technology. Without the technology we have nowadays, there would be absolutely no way we'd be able to reuse a rocket.
Right.
The technology for the space shuttle was old and was outdated whenever the space shuttle rolled out.
Okay.
So it was outdated on day one and just progressively got more and more and more outdated. If you've ever seen a picture of the inside of the space shuttle, there's a whole bunch of knobs and bells and whistles, and it's ridiculous. Just the amount of time it would take somebody to train to learn how to basically function a space shuttle would be ridiculous. But you look at, and I know it's a completely different vehicle, but similar systems that are now in the Dragon 2 spacecraft from SpaceX, Elon Musk's company, there's only maybe 1 or 2 buttons. The rest of everything is touchscreen. The space shuttle, at least the American version of the space shuttle, Russia had the Buran, which in some ways could have been considered better than the space shuttle, and it only flew once. But our space shuttle was not really autonomous. It was autonomous during one portion of the flight. Everything else was completely done by captain or pilot and co-pilot.
Right.
And Nowadays, that's not the case. The astronauts can get in the craft and launch, come back, and never touch a button on it. Then you start looking into the more in-depth stuff. You know how I said that technology was really big and linked with reusability?
Mm-hmm.
For example, the Falcon 9s and Falcon Heavies and everything, they are reusable. They can land by themselves. They can offset their course by themselves. They do everything through machine learning and autonomously. About a minute before liftoff,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole time it's in space, coming back, landing, doing whatever it needs to do, it has very little to absolutely no human contact.
Okay.
And then you're also looking into the technology of the engines that they were building and everything. Back then, it was basically trial and error. You physically put this something together, see if it works, if it doesn't, tweak it, and then try it again. Nowadays, they can run simulations
Yeah.
with all these different variables and find the best approach to whatever problem they are trying to achieve. And that allows them margin to start adding reusability.
So with this technology now, so would that allow for changes to be done, like as technology progresses? Because like what are they? The Voyager, the ones that are the furthest
Voyager.
ones out,
Yes.
right? Well, NASA still has to keep the computer systems from that was around when they built those still to communicate, and they won't be able to get rid of that until they can no longer receive anything from them, and or until they die or until they go so far that they can't receive any noticeable and not negligible. What's the word? Intelligible
Yeah.
signals from there. But they have to keep it the same. So with the technology today, for example, if we were to do the same thing and launch something today all the way out to the Kuiper Belt, would we be able to update, or would someone have to keep a computer system for 30, 40, 50 years without updating it in order to be able to communicate with that system?
See, our biggest problem that we have with that, and the reason they do keep the old computers going to keep in contact with those, are because it's the difference between analog and digital. You can do analog to analog fairly easy, and you can do digital to digital fairly easy. But whenever you're trying to transfer analog to digital and digital to analog, that's where things get a little iffy, and it's just easier to keep the old computers. With these new computers, since everything's digital, about the only thing that I can foresee, of course, I'm not a future teller or anything.
Right, yeah.
Only thing that I can see that'll make it difficult in a situation like that is if we get quantum computing down. And it's still digital in a way, but it's a quantum digital versus our usual digital that we're used to now.
Okay, so with the ones and zero digital today,
Mm-hmm.
quantum, which is a whole nother entire...
It's 1 and 0 at the same time until observed.
Okay. That makes no fucking sense to me.
Oh, I can sit here,
quantum-
I can sit here and explain that to
quantum
you.
mechanics and all that other shit.
This is
crazy
why
shit.
we have him on here, because you and me couldn't do this.
I would be like Wikipedia going,
I
what is
wouldn't
that
use
blue
Wikipedia
word?
because you can go up in the top right hand corner, go edit, and then go
Yeah, but it depends on the article,
Einstein
though. 'Cause-
shit on this spacecraft and push post, and it would
Yeah, but the
change
thing
it.
is, though, it depends on certain articles now are protected on
True.
Wikipedia, so you can't edit them.
Mhm.
So if
But I'm
it's,
glad they finally
especially
did
if
that.
it's especially if it's been verified, like this article is
It's
100% correct,
Mhm.
no edit. But also now they also have a verification stage now.
Mhm.
So like one time I was seeing something in our city, our town was spelled wrong
Mhm.
in one Wikipedia article. I edited it. It took 3 days before it finally posted because it had to go through a verification process. So now it's instead of, because one time I remember in in middle school I did this. I was on Wikipedia for Mount Vesuvius. I went, Mount Vesuvius is a volcano, and it is very dangerous, and you will die if you touch it. And go boom.
And go boom.
Yeah, and it was there
And
for
this
like
is why
months.
Well, you're not
Every
wrong.
report, this is why every
Yeah.
report in school I had to do from middle school through high school is like, if you use Wikipedia, you're wrong because you don't know who the fuck fucked with it.
But see, the thing
I
about
remember
Wikipedia,
that.
there are some things that are faulty with it. But the thing about Wikipedia, though, you can get, especially if it's a real verified source, like where there's actual authentic verification, you can get a lot of good information off Wikipedia.
You really can.
Yeah.
You
So,
just
but
take it with a grain of salt.
yeah, but see, I'd be
But if you
going,
see the edit tab, like, I'm
Right.
not touching that one.
but like, I'd be going through Wikipedia going, oh, and this guy over here, he's like, actually.
Yeah, we get on those rants all the time.
Mhm.
It's 90% of our conversations are correcting each other.
Yeah. It's like, actually. See, he corrects me on that sciencey space stuff, then I correct his grammar. So, I mean, that's kind of
yeah, you would make one hell of an English professor.
ew. I hate
The way
English.
you are, There's a cup I saw for you, even though you don't drink coffee or anything out of a mug.
I drink
But
hot
it said
chocolate.
Grammar Police on it. I thought about getting it for you. 'Cause
I'm
you're the first person I thought
constantly
about.
finding stuff like that and immediately think of him. You know, it's sad whenever that
Yeah,
happens.
anything that says Grammar Police or anything
No,
related.
anytime I
it's you.
read his posts on Facebook or anything like that, I read it initially and go, "Oh, okay," and then I read it again. That's wrong. That's wrong. There should be a comma there. That's wrong.
I'm surprised you're
That's
not going to the comments going, okay, you spell this word is here, it's spelled like this. Oh, you forgot a comma here. You
Well,
need
the
to-"
reason I don't do that because then underneath that post would be 185 comments of us going back and forth about shit.
Well, I'm sorry, Jonathan, that I wasn't good in English. Math and physics was my subjects. I'm sorry.
Well, then how
I'll
are you
stick
going
with
to?
history.
Yeah, fuck off. How are you going? I'm just kidding. How are you going to be able to write your paper when you find something? You know, like if you have to publish a study, how are you going to be able to do that?
Spell
Mist?
check.
I was going to say Word has spell check and grammar
But-
check now.
okay, yeah. You have fucking spell check, right? You have fucking spell check. But if you fucking say night, as in you're referring to dark time, if you say night,
dark time.
yes. If you say night, or if you actually put a K in there, spell check's going to be like, that is correct. That is a word.
Yeah, it will.
And
It
then-
will say the word is correct, but it will say in context
Not
of the sentence that it is
necessarily.
wrong.
Not
Well,
necessarily. Not all the time.
That's why there's editors.
That too. He's got you on all of it.
Fuck off. So anyway, back to what we were actually talking about. Continue, sir, with the whole quantum stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I wasn't going to go too in depth about the quantum stuff, but that's going to be the only thing that's going to push us to where we'll have to do like we've already done with the
Mhm.
Apollo and Voyager programs, go from analog to digital, then digital to quantum. But back on the space shuttle and transferring from the space shuttle to the stuff nowadays. The technology on the space shuttles were dated since day one, and then they announced that in 2011, 2012, they were going to retire the space shuttles. Well, whenever they were going to retire the space shuttles, we had absolutely no right to space. So for the past, 7 years, 6, 7 years, we have been relying on Russia, paying Russia $90 to $100 million a seat to send people to the International Space Station. Well, years and years and years ago, back in 2000, 2001, NASA started up a new section of the organization called the Commercial Crew Program. And there's various other things that are similar and or linked to that. The biggest problem that we're going to have with NASA, I hate to love NASA and I love to hate NASA at the same time. They run off of a bureaucratic system.
Right.
Their goals are always aligned with whoever's in office at the time. So every 4 to 8 years, their plans are going to swing either drastically or just minutely. And they never know until it happens. So they may set aside a couple $2 billion for this project. 4 years later, they're on a completely different project and it's evolved. So a lot of the stuff that NASA has done has reiterated 3, 4, 5 times before anything's ever actually seriously thought about it, because that's how many presidencies have gone through since then. They're also very slow because the way the Apollo missions were set up, it was not set up to be efficient. It was not set up to, frankly, even work. It was set up to get approval.
Mhm.
Kennedy did not want to go to the moon. He thought that would be the best option as a big middle finger to Russia. When they're trying to build the Saturn V or anything that they've done in the past 50 to 60 years, it has not been ran efficiently. It has been ran so they could get congressmen to approve the money that they need. So you may build an engine here in Georgia. You may ship the engine all the way across the United States to California to get checked. Now I'm just making these names up because I don't have them right off the top of my head.
Right, yeah.
And then the tanks are built in point A and then sent all the way across the country to point B to get tested. But these other types of tanks are being built somewhere else completely different, being shipped over here, and we're talking massive things. So it's not cheap to move any of this stuff.
Right, yeah.
And then the stuff itself costs millions, if not billions of dollars itself. So then they got to hire stuff for various different safety things. And then they all send it to the same place, install it, and then it goes. So a lot of the stuff NASA has done has been billion-dollar projects that shouldn't have been quite so high. And so NASA, whenever in 2001 they started the Commercial Crew Program, it was kind of to bypass that and give it to commercial companies, which a lot of the technology that NASA had been using, yes, A lot of it is state of the art, but then again, it wasn't efficient because they had contracts with this company or contracts with this company, or they were helping this company out. So even though they made everything work and did everything the best, they did not do it as efficient as they probably could have. So though NASA has pushed humankind the furthest humankind has ever been, we're past that point. We're over that hump. And now, for the longest time, NASA was holding us back. Now you introduce SpaceX and Blue Origin and all these other companies. NASA relied on Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman for decades. And then Lockheed Martin and Boeing decided they were going to team up and create ULA, United Launch Alliance. So there were 2, if not 3 main players in the space industry, and pretty much they all combined and monopolized the whole thing. And for decades, nobody was able to break out. There have been hundreds of small rocket startups that have just completely failed because of these multi-billion-dollar companies that have been in it for decades coming in and doing it. Then you introduce SpaceX, commercial crew program, SpaceX, so on and so forth. I'm going to be talking a lot about SpaceX because, of course, Elon Musk, my baby daddy. But with everything I'm saying, there are other companies doing the same, if not similar things, competing with SpaceX. SpaceX is the most blunt about it, the most open about it, because their main goal, besides getting people on Mars and starting Mars colonies, is to get society back up and going about space travel, because that is our next step. The humankind has always explored. We started over in the Fertile Crescent, and then we started expanding out from there. And we've constantly been expanding. We've mastered the seas, we've mastered the air, we've mastered walking, cars, mastered many different things. But we've yet to master, don't get me wrong, we're good at space flight and travel, but we have yet to even come close to mastering it. So that's going to be our next step, frankly, in human evolution, is taking that next step. Because we have no borders. You ever heard of the overseer effect?
No.
It's what every single astronaut that has been to the International Space Station or beyond has had. It's called the overseer effect. Once you go into space and look down at the Earth and realize that from where you're standing, you're seeing all of human history. You're seeing what could be of humanity. You're seeing absolutely no borders. You're seeing the lights from our streets, and you just have a complete new look of the world. Every astronaut that has been in space has had it. It's always been this hidden gem, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, that only if you were really smart and really knowledgeable and pushed yourself for decades could you get to have that effect. Here and pretty soon, just anybody will be able to have that effect. Because technology, as it's progressed, the same technology that's been in your cell phones and has been maturing in your cell phones, been maturing in the computers that we use on a daily basis, everything that runs your life is now being transferred over to the rocket sector and is allowing us to do things that we've never thought possible. For many generations, or not generations, decades, people have thought that reusing a rocket was impossible. Because you have your rocket equation, which I'm not going to go into the math and everything behind it. But basically what the rocket equation consists of is when you're going into space, you have to have a fuel. If you ever remember that old triangle whenever you were younger about fire, how it needs a fuel, how it needs an oxidizer, and how it needs heat. When you're in a plane, all you got to do is carry fuel. You get the oxidizer from the atmosphere, the oxygen. Same thing in a car. You only carry the fuel. You get the oxidizer from the atmosphere. Oxygen in the atmosphere. It's everywhere, right? When you're in space, you have no atmosphere. You have no oxygen. So you have to carry your fuel and your oxidizer. So to get to space, you have to have your fuel, oxidizer, and then whatever your payload is. It's mandatory you have your fuel. It's mandatory you have your oxidizer. The payload comes secondary to get you into space. So if you're going to carry more payload to space, you need more what? Fuel and oxidizer.
Right.
Which adds more weight, which means you need more thrust, which means you need more fuel and oxidizer, which means you need more thrust, and it's just an ongoing cycle over and over and over. It does not stop. That's why to send something about the size of a minivan to the moon, it takes a rocket the size of the Saturn V. You're fighting the gravity, and you've got the rocket equation.
Well, see, because that's also where that one company though is experimenting with like a rocket launched off of a plane,
Yes.
right? So like they launch it from the plane because then it's less distance it has to travel,
Mm-hmm.
so it's not having to fight the initial gravity. Because as you get higher up in the atmosphere, gravity gets less the further away you get from the Earth's
Mm-hmm.
surface. They're like, all right, cool. That's less energy, which means smaller rockets, which bigger payload can go out.
Mm-hmm.
How are we evolving even into like not to that? You don't have to, you can keep
Yeah.
going with what you're saying, but like just in terms of fuel, how are we?
We have the computers that do the pre-designs and everything beforehand. And that is basically what has allowed us to do reusability. Because you get to narrow your tuning of whatever part you're working on. You get to narrow that down. You get to narrow it down. You get to test it hundreds of times versus only a few times if you were messing with it by hand. You get to do it hundreds, if not thousands of times in a simulation. And so you're able to whittle your piece of artwork down to where you have that margin, because whenever you're going into space, you use all that fuel to go 16,000 miles an hour, 5 times faster than a speeding bullet to orbit the Earth. And once you get up there and your first stage drops off and your second stage continues to bring you up to 23,000 miles an hour or kilometers an hour, my bad. That first stage booster usually would fall back to the Earth, burn up in the atmosphere, land in a certain spot in the ocean right next to Australia, and just be done for. But now, since they have a little bit more of a margin in fuel and oxidizer, they're able to literally turn that booster around, fire its engine, cancel all the thrust it just added into it, and bring it back to the launch pad, turn around, and land itself. Before, whenever you would launch a rocket, whenever you had stage separation, your first stage was out of fuel. You had absolutely no margin to cancel out or land anything. But technology has allowed us to tinker with it a lot more in depth, to where now that is it's happening. It's already happened. It's been happening for years, where you can literally watch a 40-story rocket land on its own.
Yeah, see, I've seen the videos of them landing the rockets
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. So, but I mean, so what do you think? Because I mean, I don't know. We might have to have you come back for another episode,
Mhm.
just to keep talking more about this,
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, so with that, just because we're just now scratching the surface into
Mm-hmm.
today's technology. I mean, you haven't even fully gone into today's technology.
Oh, I could sit here and go into Neuralink. I can go into the Boring Company. I can go into Tesla. I can go into quantum physics. I can go into all this, because when you start talking about it and start actually getting more of an in-depth look at where everything's going, we are on the cusp of something magnificent.
So how do you see space exploration now that it's basically no longer a bureaucratic thing? It's allowed to be industrialized and privatized. How do you think that is going to influence the future of space travel, since it's no longer a thing if you have to wait for government funding? It can be privately funded now.
Mm-hmm.
It can be, if let's say Steven and I decided tomorrow to just fucking start a rocket company, we could be sending shit out into space ourselves,
Mhm.
So like, how do you think that is going to, because I mean, now if you think about it, it's no longer a competition between two rival countries,
Mhm.
right? So like all three of us could be like, oh shit, Jory has this technology, is wanting to do that. How the fuck can I R&D,
Mhm.
and beat him, to where I get the contract or I get this further, and Steven's like, oh, fuck both of you guys. I'm going to fucking go to Jupiter, right? I'm going to fucking, fuck its red eye, like, fuck you guys. So like that, I mean, I could see that getting,
Mhm.
where it's further and further out. But how do you think that so far, reasonably, not like just theoretically, not, any type of theoretical shit yet, but physically that you think we could foreseeably do now that it's privatized rather than being bureaucratic?
All right. So, okay, I'm going to start with this. Whenever you go and flying, let's say you're going to fly to wherever, right?
Right.
Everything functions, especially with this, everything coming out in space, on reusability.
Mhm.
Because you wouldn't fly a 747 from New York to Los Angeles, bail out of the 747, and throw the 747 away in the ocean.
Right.
And then when you need to go back, you get in a brand new 747, get to New York, bail out, and let the 747 land in that ocean. It takes billions of dollars to design for the development of a 747 or something similar to it, and millions of dollars to run.
Mm-hmm.
But frankly, for the most part, since they are reusable, all they got to do is land, fill up, turn around, and fly. You don't have to buy a new aircraft every time you want to go across the country.
Right.
But that's the way it's been with rockets. So now that we are mastering reusability, it's going to allow for pretty much what your imagination can entail. For example, SpaceX right now is building and testing what's called the Starship and Super Heavy, aka BF, or the Big Falcon rocket. And it's going to be 100% reusable, but that's going to be what brings space travel to the masses. So I'm going to start off by what they have announced they are going to do versus just trying to come up with situations where this technology may impact us. What they've announced that they're going to do is and they're working on it, they're going to take over the airline industry. Because right now, I could be completely wrong on my numbers, completely off on my numbers. It takes 12 plus hours to go across the ocean to Europe or Asia or wherever you're going. Even longer if you're going to Australia. Hours and hours. And people do it all the time, especially for business. Here in the next 5 to 10 years, that's not going to be the case. You're going to be able to hop on the BFR and you're going to be able to travel most places in the world in under 30 minutes, anywhere in the world in 45 minutes or less. For about the same ticket as a business class on a 747. So just imagine just that one thing they are doing, what that can entail. If whoever is having a problem over in China, it's a United States-based company, but they have a factory over in China, and they are having major issues versus trying to communicate with it and trying to get everything figured out, they could just be there in 30 minutes. An hour with the transportation to the rocket and back. You can get, right now and for years, the biggest thing has been overnight shipping.
Right. Yeah.
What about same day shipping?
Well, I mean, I could see like if you're having to ship over international, I mean, that could reduce hubs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like instead of having to be like, if for example, like someone in Europe orders something overnight from Texas, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't reasonably do that because one, you have to send it off early as fuck in the morning and pray that it gets on a plane and gets to wherever in Europe and then goes there, but more than likely that's not going to be a 1 day overnight thing. That's going to minimum 2-3 day thing.
Yes.
So if you're able to you'd have to have hubs in Europe and those hubs would have to have that product.
Mm-hmm.
So that way they could reasonably overnight it over there.
Mm-hmm.
So for that, I could see that being like, all right, sweet. It's a US based company or even an Italian or, England based company and you want to order there instead of having to wait for it to get over here. It can be in the States like that.
In a matter of 3 to 4 hours.
Right. After going through customs, and checking and, all that shit. And then the longest it would take would be just going to that company to then drive it to you.
Yeah.
That'd be the longest process.
Transportation from wherever you're going to the hub would be the majority of the time.
Yeah. So I mean, I could see that. And if it can hold a normal payload, I mean, you could do, if it can, I don't know if it can, but if it can, like right now, the 747, it's a cargo ship, a cargo plane, but also it can be a passenger plane. So they can go both ways, but it's one or the other. Like you can sometimes have small stuff ship with a 747 that's a passenger plane, but most of the time it's either a passenger plane or it's a cargo plane, and with that, you might be able to get away with going like, all right, cool. We have people on this rocket flying, over wherever the fuck, but we also need to ship stuff there at the same time so that we can, put some stuff in there. Because at the beginning, more than likely, not that many people are going to want to do it.
Yeah.
I can see more shipping companies be on board with that more so than people. Because obviously people are skeptical. But with it going that fast, though, I wonder. I personally think, just by stuff I've looked at, that I think the Concorde is type of aircraft is going to come first before the rocket type of shit. Because I think people are going to be more willing to go supersonic in a plane looking thing than being like, let's go on a rocket that we know can have a history of blowing the fuck up.
Initially, it seems like you're going to be able to take logic that from the aerospace industry and apply that same logic to the astrospace industry. They sound similar, the Air Force, so on and so forth. All in all, they've been side by side. But if you actually start getting into it, you realize that you cannot apply that same logic. The thing with the Concorde and with supersonic and even hypersonic things is they need to be small, powerful, and streamlined. That's the reason the Concorde frankly failed as well. And there's only 2 that are still working in existence today. I could be completely wrong on that, but I think
right
it's
now there's none that are operational. I mean,
yes,
they may work, but in service, because also the U.S. passed the whole law of you can't go about, unless it's a national emergency in your military aircraft, you can't go beyond the speed of sound. But even then, it was so expensive, and not that many people were getting it. And it wanted to be more expensive to operate, having to go that fast.
It took twice the amount of fuel.
Yeah.
And you could only take 40 or so people on the Concorde. So it's basically like a 747, only you can only take 40 people, and it was twice as expensive to run as a 747.
Right.
That's completely different when you're starting to talk about space. Whenever you actually start getting into the speeds we're talking about with rockets, it's actually better for it to be bigger. It does not need to be streamlined. Actually, the more blunt the vehicle, the better. And then we start getting into our pressure waves and different really technical things on that. But your logic for your aerospace, basically flip your logic on its head, and that's your logic for astrospace. So you're actually able to take more efficiently than, maybe not cheaper per se, but relatively speaking, more efficiently than you could the same amount of people on a supersonic jet.
Okay.
So, for example, the BFR, which is almost complete and should be flying by the end of this year, is going to be the world's biggest and most powerful rocket ever built. It's taller and twice as powerful as the Saturn V. And it'll be able to take 100 metric tons anywhere in the world in under 45 minutes. With orbital refueling, 100 metric tons to the moon and 100 metric tons to Mars. So whenever we're doing point-to-point travel on the Earth, just imagine 100 metric tons getting anywhere in the world in under an hour.
I think personally, I don't know about you, Steven, but I think we definitely need to have Jory come back.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, because I mean because we haven't even fucking scratched the surface on shit.
No, but I do like the idea of business trips taking one day instead of weeks.
I do like that.
Oh, just imagine if you're sitting there bored one day and you're like, "Hey, let's take a day trip to China."
That'd be nice.
Well, because see, I mean, the thing is, because I really want to go to
the ass to make a day trip to like Dallas,
right? Like I'm planning on going to Australia someday because I've always wanted to go to Australia. I've always ever since Steve Irwin, I've been in love with Australia. Obviously, I also watched this one show called Saddle Club. I used to be in love with that show, which is filmed in Australia.
So it's a beautiful countryside.
Yes, and it is. And I mean, I really want to go to Australia. I also want to go to England.
I did hear that girls from Australia, if they hear you're from Texas, their panties will drop.
I don't know about that. That'd be nice. I doubt that.
Well, there's one way to try this out.
Yeah, let me end up in jail in Australia. Yeah, but
I'm from Texas.
Huh. He was right after all.
You're like, I'm glad I got that international plan. Let me call him real quick.
Like you're right.
Yeah, right. But like I could see and right now the fastest flight, because I looked this up, from here, the fastest one I think was like a 27, 28 hour flight. And that's because not only with changes, but you got the longest of it is flying to Australia. But you go from here, you take off either, depending on wherever you go. You could either go to Houston, you can go to Dallas, you might go to Oklahoma City, Albuquerque, some other big hub, and then fly to LA. And LA, or you could fly, I think, It's somewhere on the West Coast, but a massive city's
Mhm.
hub. But then you get on Australia Air. And from there, it's like a 14, 15-hour flight.
I was
You
gonna
know.
say it's like 14 to 16 hours to
Yeah.
go from Australia to LA.
Yeah. And then there. And that's to Sydney. And where I want to go is Beerwah, right? Which means the closest hub there is Melbourne.
Mhm.
So I'd have to fly there because I want to go see Australia Zoo. So that's why need to be going to Beerwah. But Melbourne is the closest that you'd fly. So you have to fly from Sydney to Melbourne. And unless you get one that goes straight to Melbourne. But so far, every single one I've seen always flies to Sydney. But I mean, if you could do that and then, that could be like, all right, cool. I want to go to Melbourne, but I've got to, all right, it's going to be an hour to get, or maybe depending on wherever that massive hub is, it could be
Mhm.
like the total trip may be like 5 hours. So it's like, I've got to get on a plane, fly to where the hub is, right?
Mhm.
Then from the hub to Australia, then a plane to there.
Yes.
And then overall total 5 hours, which is typical amount of time for flying from, here to Florida,
yes.
because obviously got layovers and shit.
Mm.
So if you're able to do that, maybe 6 hours with a layover, then fly to LA, get on the BFR, then ride over to, Australia, then another plane from Sydney to, Melbourne, for
Yes.
example. And then do that. I mean, that would definitely be more reasonable if you
Yeah.
think about it.
And that's what they would start with. Would have those major hubs in major cities off of coasts.
But see, I could see that only being reasonable if you're flying far. Like, I wouldn't see them doing it, from they might, but I don't see them doing it in New York to LA type of distance.
I could see them doing it from New York to LA if after they get everything down.
Yeah, because I could see it being like, we're going to go overseas type of shit, or really far, like from New York or even LA to London, right? Or from New York or even LA to Australia
Well,
to China,
Look at what we've already experienced. Maybe not you personally, but look what we've experienced in general. When planes first came out, whenever planes started getting popular during World War II and so on and so forth, majority of planes were for long distance travel, for halfway around the world or whatever, right?
Right.
And then as their
Technology
technology progressed and
Yeah.
they've got their system down, now somebody could take a flight to Dallas, and though the flight's only 30 45 minutes, 30 years ago that would be a no-go.
Right.
You would have to drive that or take a bus on that. So as time and technology has progressed, more and more and more people and more situations require a plane. I feel like it would be the same way. It's been that way in almost every transportation industry so far. I feel it would be the same way with the rocket industry. At first, yes, it would be for main cargo from point A to point B on the earth, or cargo as in people as well, from point A to point B. And as they whittle down their technique and technology progresses, it'll be able to be used for shorter and shorter distances and actually make sense. And then it would
Because
be,
I could see it also at first starting off with only wealthy that can do it.
yes.
Like only the actual super wealthy. Because that's how even air travel was at first. Like,
Well, right off the bat, tickets for point-to-point transfer or travel would be $2,000 or $3,000, which isn't really that bad.
in the grand scheme of things, no. But like the average person just wanted to go
Yes.
to London, for example.
The
in
average
30
person,
minutes, no.
yes. But it would still, even though you may not travel that system in and of itself would still have a massive impact on your life and frankly
Oh,
your
yeah.
way of living.
But I could see if it becomes standardized
Mhm.
and it becomes, like air travel is, I could see them having like different companies that do it
Yes.
with a getaway travel thing.
Mhm.
Like I could see American Airlines getting into it. I could see even Southwest. And the reason I say that is just because they can tie in. So like they could have their own hub that goes
Yes.
to London Heathrow, for example, So it's like, all right, cool. You get on a Southwest plane from Dallas and you're going to fly to, let's say, or it could even be in Houston. So you just fly to Houston from here, fly to Houston, get on that thing, you're in
Mhm.
London, or fly to Orlando or fly to New York, wherever one of their other hubs are. I could see them even getting into
Yes.
it when it becomes more standardized, because then they're able to, could you imagine a Southwest rocket painted like that?
Yeah,
Like
I really could.
It's like if it stands up like this, you know, which rocket's the one that's going to be on downward facing when it's flying, you know, perpendicular. Oh, it's the one with the gold on it. You know, there's obviously we're obviously going to be sitting like this, and then we're going to go like that, so we know which side we're going to sit on because of how Southwest paints their planes. But I mean, I could see that, you know, and then that's when tickets can become reasonable, because when air travel was first thing, it was only the wealthy that could do it.
Yes.
And then, you know, as we see now, sometimes even airline companies have the want to get away type of thing where you can go from here to New York for like $100, maybe even less than that, you know, and it's like way more reasonable. But anyway, I think for now, I think we can call it for now.
That's gonna be a multi-part series.
Yeah, I
eventually.
think we're definitely gonna have to have you fucking
That's
back,
for
dude.
sure.
Because I mean, we just barely scratched the fucking surface.
Mhm.
And I mean, and obviously, Steven, you're gonna have to come with fucking questions next time because you were quiet as the mouse this episode.
I don't care. I don't care.
But anyway, I think we can call it there. I think we definitely need to have you back
Yes.
for fucking sure, because that's like fuck, dude.
That's a lot to take for one.
I
episode
know,
already.
right? Just like one fucking thing, and I can
And then-
tell he's trying to like squeeze it
Yeah,
in.
He's trying
you
to
know?
squeeze it in, but he's also trying to hold back so it
he's
doesn't
like,
go too deep.
He's like, oh, I can talk about this. I'm like, just fucking talk about it, damn it. But then I'm like, don't fucking talk about it because I don't understand what you just fucking told me. So, you know,
Like when
so
you
it's
start getting into all this stuff, it becomes a massive mind fuck, pretty much. The way everything's been coming up and has been set up, we are going to see something in the next 10 to 15 years that we have never seen.
Well, I mean,
that humankind
even-
has never seen.
Well, even not just space itself. Like even when
Yes.
him and I, you and I, Steven, were talking about fucking, you know, the just regular technology of
Yeah.
today, right? Like not fucking technology. I mean, they are making better
I was
fucking
saying they're
technology.
I was just about to say,
I was gonna
they
they
got
are.
that.
Yeah, I know. I remember seeing a thing.
I
like,
mean, they have machines.
it's
you
very
stick
actually lifelike. Like, okay, someone will finally love me.
There's also machines with the dildo strapped on it, so you can see.
Exactly.
They've
Well,
got all
there's
this
also
stuff.
there's also vaginas.
Hey, I
Yeah,
got a
you know,
question
that you
for you.
could.
I got a question for you. If she's made out of metal, does consent count?
I say depends if she's sentient or not.
I agree with that.
Well, then we come up to what is sentience question, but we can go on another
I
complete
know,
rant on
like
that
that's
as
a
well.
whole nother fucking episode. Like fucking hell, Jory, goddamn it. But all right, I think we can call it there.
Yeah.
Definitely gonna have to have Jory back for fucking sure. But anyway, thank you everybody for listening to Flatlands. Oh, you forgot, eh?
I'm not. I'm letting you do your
Okay.
thing. I'm letting.
Okay, fine.
He took your
Yeah.
hosting privileges away
Yeah.
earlier. I'm
Okay,
giving
so
it
do you
back.
wanna do the
I'm
outro,
giving it
bitch?
back.
But anyway, thank you everyone for listening to Flatlands, the podcast. I'm Jonathan,
I'm Steven.
and
I'm Jory.
we'll see you guys next time.